Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna. Can you hear me?
Yes, Maharaj. My humble obeisances. You are welcome, Maharaj.
Jai Bhakti Swami. Hare Krishna.
Maharaj, unmute yourself.
Hare
Am I?
Krishna, brothers.
And you can't hear me then.
I'm
We are
hearing
hearing
you.
you. We are hearing you.
Okay.
Come in. You come in now.
Muss ich den ganzen Namen eingeben? Ja.
Hello, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, we can start, Maharaj. People are coming to come now.
Can you allow me to record for myself?
Okay. Okay. Sure.
Okay.
Now you can record, Maharaj.
Okay.
You got it? Yes.
Yeah, I got it.
Thank you.
I'll start with Jayarada Madhava.
Yes, Maharaj.
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava
Madhava
Kunja
Kunja
Bihari
Bihari
Gopi Janabalabha Giribara Dari Jai
Gopi
Gopi
Janavallabha Giridhari
Yasodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yasodanandana
Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana
Yamunatira Vanachari
Yamuna
Yamunatira
Tira Vanachari
Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Jaya Radha Madhava
Kunja
Kunja Bihari
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna
Krishna
Krishna Krishna Hare Hare
Hare
Hare Rama Hare Rama
Rama
Rama Rama Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
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 Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandehang Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatanbitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Dapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare
Krishna,
Krishna Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna Hare
Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Rama Hare
Hare
Rama
Rama, Rama,
Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna.
Hare
So
Krishna.
Bhakti Damodar Swami, you're in Ghana then right now. Or
I'm in
you're
Nigeria. In Nigeria.
You're in,
Nigeria.
oh, I see.
Yes.
Okay. So, all right. So let us begin here. This is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, text 13. That was what I was asked to give class on. So let's look at that verse. Uh, Dehinosmin yata dehe kaumaram yovanam jara tata dehantara prapti diras tatra namuhyati. And the English translation reads, as the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So I'll read the purport. It's not a huge, long purport. Since every living entity is an individual soul, each is changing his body every moment, manifesting sometimes as a child, sometimes as a youth, and sometimes as an old man. Yet the same spirit soul is there and does not undergo any change. The individual soul finally changes the body at death and transmigrates to another body. And since it is sure to have another body in the next birth, either material or spiritual, there was no cause for lamentation by Arjuna on account of death, neither for Bhishma nor for Drona, for whom he was so much concerned. Rather, he should rejoice for their changing bodies from old to new ones, thereby rejuvenating their energy. Such changes of body account for varieties of enjoyment or suffering according to one's work in life. So Bhishma and Drona, being noble souls, were surely going to have spiritual bodies in the next life, or at least life in heavenly bodies for superior enjoyments of material existence. So, in either case, there was no cause of lamentation. Any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul, the supersoul, and nature, both material and spiritual, is called dhira, or most sober man. Such a man is never deluded by the change of bodies. The Mayavadi theory of oneness of the spirit soul cannot be entertained on the ground that the spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces as a fragmental portion. Such cutting into different individual souls would make the supreme cleavable or changeable against the principle of the supreme souls being unchangeable. As confirmed in the Gita, the fragmental portions of the supreme exist eternally, sanatana, and are called kshara. That is, they have a tendency to fall down into material nature. These fragmental portions are eternally so, even after liberation. The individual soul remains the same, fragmental. But once liberated, he lives an eternal life in bliss and knowledge with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The theory of reflection can be applied to the Supersoul, who is present in each and every individual body and is known as the Paramatma. He is different from the individual living entity. When the sky is reflected in water, the reflections represent both the sun and the moon and the stars also. The stars can be compared to the living entities and the sun or moon to the Supreme Lord. The individual fragment spirit soul is represented by Arjuna, and the Supreme Soul is the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. They are not on the same level, as will be apparent in the beginning of the fourth chapter. If Arjuna is on the same level with Krishna, then Krishna is not superior to Arjuna. Then their relationship of instructor and instructed becomes meaningless. If both of them are deluded by illusory energy, Maya, then there's no need of one being the instructor and the other the instructed. Such instruction would be useless because in the clutches of Maya, no one can be an authoritative instructor. Under the circumstances, it is admitted that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Lord, superior in position to the living entity Arjuna, who is a forgetful soul deluded by Maya. Dehinoshmin yata dehe komaram yovanam jara tata dehantara prapti dhiras tatra namuhyati. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body, from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. The sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So this is probably basics of Krishna consciousness 101, we could say. This is the most important part that we usually start with for Krishna consciousness. When we think about what is our position here, we were talking about this 2 days ago in our Wednesday morning class in Radha Govinda Mandir, that in our world, in the Western world, mostly people have no information. They don't have any idea what's going on in this world. They imagine and assume things often. They try to understand maybe what's going on, but they're confronted with different answers from different sources. And because there are many different answers to who am I, what is this world, is there a God, um, how did I get here, why do I suffer, because there's so many different answers, then we really don't know what to think. People are just confused and frustrated. When you're confused and frustrated, you don't know where to turn, and that's unfortunate. However, the Vedas cut through all this confusion. They give us a complete picture, a picture that works, and they help us to understand what is really going on here in this world. So, from boyhood to youth to old age. We have, of course, this image of the living being starting out as a baby at the bottom left there, and then the living being gets older, becomes youth, becomes a middle-aged person, then finally gets older and finally dies and enters a new embryo and does it all over again. Now, this is assuming that the living entity lived a somewhat pious life. They get a human body. If not, then there's no guarantee that we go from this human life to another human life. We may go into the animal species. So there are 8,400,000 species of life. Only 400,000 are humanoid types. The others, they are all various kinds of animals, insects, plants, and so forth, aquatics. So this is the situation for those who did not live any kind of pious life and in fact live very sinfully. They wind up being demoted to bodies that are not human. And of course, when you're demoted from a human body, then you have to suffer as you work your way back up to the human form. Automatically, every time you die as a lower animal, you are promoted to the next higher consciousness, higher type of consciousness of animal. And this is the nature of the reincarnation cycle. So here we have a sober person is not bewildered by such a change. And the word in Sanskrit for sober is dhira. So we have our Bhakti Dhira Damodar Swami. He is a sober person. And he is representing the Vedic culture, the Vedic system of understanding, the system that Prabhupada so carefully allowed us to understand and come to know. So this verse, which is the 13th verse of the second chapter, Dehinosmin yata dehe komaram yovanam jara sta dehantara prapti dirastatra gives us a simple analogy. Sometimes I think devotees may not focus in on what this verse is actually saying. So um, someone can say, how do I know that there's reincarnation? Uh, you Hare Krishna people, you talk about reincarnation, but how do I know? Uh, the fact is, we're already reincarnating even before we die. The scientists explain that, generally speaking, that every 7 years or so, the cells are replicating their existence. So an old cell dies, and before it died, it duplicated itself. So cells are dividing in our bodies. New cells are being created. Old ones are dying. The old ones get sloughed off. Um, and so therefore, we are getting a new body even now. Of course, it's happening very slowly, but over the course of approximately 7 years, there is nothing left from the body that we had 7 years ago. Of course, we look at a picture of how we looked as a young boy or young girl, we can see there's a facial resemblance, but the body is very different in size. So somewhere we changed in size. Not only did we change in size, but every cell in the body is different now. Yet we don't recall having changed who we were. We still feel like the same person that we felt like when we were a baby or a youth, but now we're much older. We feel like the same person. So we are already reincarnating. If the body is being changed out, then what is the same? If we had an automobile and I said, well, these tires are getting old. I'm going to change the tires. Okay, so we change the four tires. So we say, okay, the engine is kind of worn out. Now I'm going to put in a new engine. So we put in a new engine. Then we say, well, the interior's getting kind of messed up now. We need to fix it. So we redo the entire interior. Then we think, well, the outside body is getting kind of rusty, and we think about replacing the outside uh, body of the car, the shell of it. Um, and then eventually the water gets to the undercarriage, and we say, well, maybe we need to replace the entire chassis. And we replace the differential and the drive shaft. And we replace the, gas tank and the inside of the dashboard, all new. Eventually, there's nothing left of the original car. We might as well just have bought a new car. And to call it the same car is misleading because actually everything has been replaced. This happens on computers too. We get a bigger hard drive, we change the RAM, maybe we get a new chip for the internet connection. We get a new network internet card. We change the keyboard because one of the keys breaks or something like that. So bit by bit, the entire computer is being replaced. And at some point, there's nothing left of the original computer. So in a similar way, our bodies are being gradually changed out. And if we feel like the same person, then we have to ask the question, well, what didn't change? Everything changed, but what did not change? And the scientists have no answer for that question. What didn't change? They say some kind of hand waving stuff about, well, we have the same neural connections or something like that, but they don't actually know that. The connections in the brain, there's so many billions of them that there's no way they can actually tell how much things have changed or haven't changed. And this is not the seat of the soul. This is not the seat of consciousness. Rather, we have the body, which is the outer shell. That's the thing that we usually look at in the mirror every morning when we get up. We look at that thing and we brush its teeth. That's the material body. In Sanskrit, it's known as the stula sharira, the gross body. It's made of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. It's made of chemicals, and those chemicals can be rearranged. And the cells in that body, they're changing constantly. But within the gross body, there is a subtle body that we see here inside the shell of the gross body. And the subtle body is made not of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. It's made of mind, intelligence, and false ego. The Bhagavad Gita explains these things, um, that there are subtle elements, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Now, this subtle body is how the soul goes from one body to another. Obviously, when the gross body is either killed by some accident or some violence, or through old age, when the gross body stops functioning because it's too old, when that happens, the subtle body leaves it, and the subtle body then can go in to another gross body as a baby. So this is reincarnation. Now, we are not the gross body, but we are also not the subtle body. Subtle body is that thing made of mind, intelligence, and false ego, which takes the soul, which is that spark that you see in the very center. So the spark is the soul. The spark is the original self. So through devotional service, we gradually dissolve this subtle body, this outside subtle body, which is taking us from one body to another. This is described in fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Once the subtle body is dissolved, that doesn't mean we cease to exist or we merge with the entirety of the universe. No. The subtle body, once it is dissolved, means we no longer have any separate interest from Krishna. That means we've become pure devotees. So when the subtle body dissolves, then there's no reason for a new gross body. And on death, instead of taking another baby body somewhere, or an animal body, or an insect body, if we are more sinful, instead of that, we go back to the spiritual world because we have no subtle body. So the subtle body is also material, but the subtle body is not gross matter. Subtle body is subtle matter. So gross matter is earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And subtle matter is mind, intelligence, and false ego. These are two different kinds of matter, but they are matter. And so the subtle body is not directly perceivable, but there are times where, due to some accident or some sinful action, or during a situation where someone has committed suicide, the subtle body remains without any gross body. And we call that a ghost. That's what a ghost is. A ghost is a subtle body with no gross body. So without a gross body, we still exist. We don't need a gross body, and we don't need a subtle body either. And that little tiny spark at the center, it also has eyes and legs and a mouth and a head. It can think, it can talk, it can do everything. But it is so tiny because right now we're in the wrong place. When this little spark goes back to the spiritual world, it expands and again becomes part of pastimes with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this is the change of bodies. This is the basic understanding of Krishna consciousness. At first, we are not the body. If we believe we're the body, we will not make much progress in Krishna consciousness. Um, and if we believe we're the body, our main goal in life will be to make the body happy. How can we make the body happy? Well, we like certain activities, we dislike other activities. So we are constantly trying to make the body happy, to make it warm, to make it find some tasty things. We want sex. We want to have nice things to hear. We want to have nice things to smell. And we want subtle things too. We want to be respected in society. We want to have money and things at our disposal. We want to have a prominent place in society. We want to be able to travel. All these kind of things make the body happy. At least we think so. So we think so. Actually, they don't really make the body very happy. Uh, but what they do is set us up to get a new material body. When we die, we will certainly get another material body because we were working for the body. We were thinking about the body. Our main goal was the body. So now, when we die, we get another body. Why not? Because that's what we wanted. And we can do that forever. We can go from one body to another body to another body. We can do that as long as we want. But it's a stupid thing to do because we never become satisfied and we suffer. Each time you have a body, it's not like you enjoy every minute of the day throughout your whole life. There's a lot of bad stuff happening in the material world. There's violence, there's frustration, there's pain, there's romantic difficulties, there are diseases, there are wars, there are oppressions of various kinds by political leaders. All this garbage is happening in the material world because this is a world of karma. Now, the body can be hurt, the body can be destroyed, the body can be burned, the body can get disease, the body can get old, the body can stop working, the body can become incapacitated for reasons that nobody can understand. But none of these things happen to the soul. So in Bhagavad Gita 2:17, Avinasi tutadvidhi yena sarvam idam tatam vinasham avyayasyasya na kaschid kartam arhati. That which pervades the entire body, you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy the imperishable soul. So the material body can be destroyed. It's obvious the material body can be destroyed. We see it happening all the time. People are dying everywhere. So it's obvious the material body can be destroyed. There's nothing at all amazing about that. And we see it happen all the time. It's an indisputable fact. Now, we can realize that the subtle body can also be destroyed. We talked about the subtle body, the linga sharira, that can also be destroyed. And in fact, we want to destroy it. But the soul itself, that can never be destroyed. And as Prabhupada said in the purport today that we just read, in the heart, there is not only our soul, but there is another soul in there, which is the super soul. So within the heart of the human being, there is the super soul. And the super soul is in every heart. The super soul sees what everyone is doing. And he is upadrastanumantas cha. He is uh, overseer and permitter. The super soul allows things to occur. The super soul sees what we desire, and sometimes the super soul fulfills our material desires, and sometimes the super soul does not fulfill our material desires. So the super soul is seeing what we want, and the super soul is energizing the entire material environment around us. And therefore, sometimes we get what we want, and sometimes we do not get what we want. And it's the super soul who decides. We are not the super soul. We only see in one body, but the super soul sees in all bodies. We are under the thumb of material energy, whereas the super soul is never under the thumb of material energy. Rather, the super soul is the master of the material energy. So the final point that I want to make before we break for some discussion here is this verse in Bhagavad Gita 2:22. This entire chapter, chapter 2, from verse 2.10 all the way up to 2.30, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna that he is not the body because he is concerned about fighting the battle of Kurukshetra. But he needn't be concerned because he's not the body. Bhishma's not the body. Drona's not the body. None of the soldiers are the body. And therefore, we need not worry about the fact that if they die, they will cease to exist. They will take another body, just like we put on new clothes. So, Vashamshi Jirnani yata vihaya navani gurnanti naro parani tatashadi dhani vihaya jirnani anyani samyati navani dehi. Try saying that very fast. That was really a tongue twister. Shamshi Jirnani Yatavihaya Navani Gurnanti Naroparani Tatasharidani Vihaya Jirnani Anyani Samyati Navani Dehi. So it's got a lot of words in it that are similar, so it's easy to trip over it. And the translation reads, as a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. So as a person puts on new garments, so the gross body is like an outfit. We put on fresh clothes. So we take off the old clothes, we put them in the laundry hamper, and we put on new clothes that have been laundered and have been dried and now smell nice. And in the same way, when the old body gets worn out, we get a new one, just like putting on a new set of clothes. So this analogy is analogy 2. The first analogy is that we are already changing bodies, just like we change from a boy body to a youth body to an old age body, or a girl body to an older woman body eventually. So just as we change in this life, we will change when we go between lives, when we go from one life to another. So here, the second analogy is that the body is like an outfit, that we take off an old and stinky outfit and we put on a new and freshly washed outfit. And in the same way, we will eventually take off this gross body and we'll put on a new body, either that or we'll go back to the spiritual world. Okay. So let me ask if we can talk some more about these things, but let me ask if in our audience here, devotees who are listening, there are any questions from anyone. So I'll stop and
Hare Krishna.
Yes, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you very much for the beautiful class, very analytical, and very grateful for the sharing of the knowledge. My good brother Krishna Prabhu is not available to coordinate the question section, so he has asked me to do that.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll ask all of the devotees Anyone with questions should kindly raise his hands and then we can. Okay, we have the first question from Harriet. You raise your hand and drop it. So if anyone asks a question, okay, I'm seeing more answers. Iskon Kaduna Mandi has a question. So the first question will be from Iskon Kaduna Mandi. You can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Where is Iska Kaduna?
Hare Krishna Guru.
Hare
Yes.
Krishna.
My question is, thank you. We really appreciate your lectures. Your lectures are very, very wonderful and very, very deep. We really celebrate you for that. My question is, at the course of your discussion, you made mention of when our gross body passes, the subtle body, now we can reincarnate. So my question is, when the subtle body now reincarnate, is the subtle body going to choose which womb is going to reincarnate, or is going to be determined by divine providence or based on an individual karma here on earth? Then the second question is not based on this. It's not based on this. The second question is, okay.
Yes, go ahead.
No? The second question is, I actually want to understand what is the key factor or the key importance of keeping Sika. Or is it mandatory or it is not mandatory? I would like to understand that. Hare Krishna.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. By the way, where is Kaduna? Is that in Nigeria or in Ghana?
Kaduna is one of the states in Nigeria, one of the northern states in the northwest of Nigeria. So we have an ISKCON temple there. So he's talking from the temple.
Okay. So these are good questions. The first question I can answer, which is really an important question, how do we get a particular body? There are two reasons why we get the body that we get. Why we have the body we have now, and when we die, why we will get a new body. And it's just like buying an automobile. Why does a person get a particular automobile? Because the body is like a car. Yantra Rudrani Maya. This body in Bhagavad Gita is described like a car or a machine, a yantra. So the person who buys a car buys one because he's attracted to a particular kind of car. We read about these cars, we watch them, sometimes we test drive them. We have friends that own one and we decide maybe we want a Ford or a Chrysler or a Mitsubishi or whatever kind of car seems to attract us. Or maybe we want a Lamborghini or a Ferrari or something like that. Now, obviously, there's another factor, two factors, two. So the other factor is how much money we have. We can want a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, but we don't have the money for one. So we have to settle for a less expensive model. And we might have to wind up with a small Cooper or something like that. So the same thing is there in how karma figures in to the cycle of reincarnation. We reincarnate, but karma figures in. So karma is like the money in this, analogy. So if you have good karma, then if you want an expensive, hard to get, high placed body, you can get it. But if you don't have good karma, then you won't get such a good body. You'll get one that's maybe not even human, or you'll get one that has some mental or physical problem, or is in a situation where the economic situation is bad, or there's a war, or there's some kind of serious social issues, or whatever it is. These are the effects of not such good karma. But of course, from a spiritual perspective, we don't really care. You know, the body you have now could be from a background of good karma, it could be from a background of bad karma, but it doesn't really matter because happiness is not based on the body that you have, and spiritual life doesn't doesn't make any difference what kind of material body you have. All that matters is how much you are serious about spiritual life. So, on the material level, what kind of body you have, where it is big difference. It's obvious. In the everyday world where you took birth, who your parents are, and so many other things makes a huge difference for material life. But for a spiritual life, it means nothing at all. So, uh, whatever kind of body we got, uh, it doesn't matter. What matters is how serious we are about spiritual life. Because if we're serious, when we leave this body, we won't have to come back to another body, either expensive, nice body or some kind of cheaper model, you know. And the thing that oftentimes people don't realize is even if you have an expensive, nice body that is um, coveted and highly praised by many kinds of people, even such a body has its problems. There are no bodies that don't have any problems. Even if you have great karma, you still have suffering. Even if you have the best kind, even if you have millions of dollars, you're still going to suffer. That's the nature of the material world. So the sensible thing to do is to make your mind up to get out of the material world, go back to the spiritual world. And your second question about the Sika, that is a marker or indication of the Vaishnav tradition. So a policeman in many countries wears a blue uniform. In India, mostly they wear khaki uniforms, but in many countries, policemen wear blue uniforms. And that way a person knows, oh, there is a policeman. So similarly, there's part of a dress code. And in India, there are many kinds of people who are engaged in various types of spiritual uh, traditions. So if you're involved in one tradition, you wear your hair in one way and you wear a certain kind of clothes. If you're involved in another tradition, you wear your hair in another way. For instance, if you're a Muslim, usually you grow a big beard and you wear one of those little hats and you wear a white outfit, usually a white kind of longish robe. If you're a Buddhist, you wear an outfit that looks something like this one, but the color is usually redder, and you completely shave your head with no hair anywhere. And if you're a Shaivite, you have T-lock that goes across horizontally, and you usually wear your hair sometimes in a bun on the top of your head. And if you're a Sikh, you take your beard and you tie it up and you wear your hair in a bun. So these are part of a kind of social marker of which tradition you are identifying with. And it doesn't absolutely matter whether you wear the outside, um, uh, clothes or the outside hairstyle. What matters most is how carefully you actually are trying to learn, not just learn, but practice spiritual life. So we're learning what spiritual life is, and therefore we also need to practice that spiritual life that we're learning about. Otherwise, whatever we're trying to learn is of very little value. You can join a club, but that won't really help you. You know, the process of spiritual life is about sadhana, about actually doing things. And these things that we do are done for a reason. We do them so that we purify ourselves. And if we're not doing any kinds of daily activities, then we can be more or less assured that our spiritual life is more or less a show bottle. It's just external.
Okay, thank you very much, Maharaj.
Yeah.
We have the next question from George Amega. So, George Amega, please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, thank you very much for a wonderful lecture. Okay, Maharaj, my question is, in this age of Kali, we know that our body duration is maximum 100 years. I would like to know of the subtle body, how many years does the subtle body also live? And I know that material body can be destroyed by any material weapon. What kind of weapon can we use to destroy the subtle body as well? That's my two questions. First, have to do with how much the life expectancy of the subtle body, because we know it's also material. Even though it's subtle, but it's also material. We know that in this age of Kali, the material body, the maximum year is 100 years. So I would like to know of the subtle body, how long does it live? We know of the material body, can use any material weapon to destroy it. But I wanted to know what kind of weapon can we use to destroy the subtle body? These are my two questions.
Okay. So the subtle body doesn't have a life expectancy like the gross body. The subtle body can be destroyed immediately, or the subtle body can go on for billions of years, reincarnating again and again and again. It doesn't have a life expectancy like the gross body does. The gross body, as is mentioned in Vedic literature, generally lasts 100 years, depending on nature of the kind of creature we're talking about. So that time scale is relative. So even though some insects only live for a day of our time, to that insect, his life is like 100 years. And then we have demigods, which live for millions of our years, but to them, their life is also like 100 years. So their sense of time is different. Now, there is no weapon that can destroy the subtle body. The subtle body has to be dissolved. It is dissolved by devotional service. So, by what is the subtle body? We just explained that it is mind, intelligence, and false ego. Now, it's probably more clear to describe it as false mind, false intelligence, and false ego, because we actually have a real ego and we have a real mind and we have real intelligence. And those real mind, real intelligence, real ego, that is a part of the soul. So there's no such thing as a soul with no mind. There's no such thing as a soul with no intelligence. There's no such thing as a soul without senses like eyes and arms and ears and all those things. The soul has those things. And for the soul, those things are all permanent. They can never be destroyed. However, we become connected by misidentification with the subtle false ego, by misidentification with the subtle false mind, by misidentification with the subtle false intelligence. And because we misidentify, then we get a gross body and we wander in this material universe from one planet to another, from one body to another, uh, reincarnating. Devotional service means we are acting on the platform of the soul. We are still confused. We still identify with the material body, but we are acting in the platform of the soul. So, by degrees, because we're acting not like bodies, we're acting like devotees. Therefore, this false mind, false intelligence, and false ego gradually dissipate. We could say that it melts or it dissipates or it gradually evaporates. And eventually, we no longer identify or misidentify with the false ego, with the false intelligence, with the false mind. We don't misidentify with those things anymore. And therefore, because we don't misidentify with them, they're gone. There is no more subtle body. And when that occurs at the end of this life, then one goes back to the spiritual world where things are eternal. The spiritual body has no expiration date. And in the spiritual world, we don't have people being born and people dying. It doesn't happen there. It does happen here, but it doesn't happen there. Is that sort of clear it up a little bit, or you still have some questions?
Thank you very much, Marat. We have another person's question, but before that, we have a question in the chat room from Keshava Prabhu. Keshava Prabhu requests that Marat please kindly explain. I'll read his questions according as he wrote it on the chat. He said, Marat, please, could you please elaborate on what exactly are the 400,000 species of human life?
Right. Okay. So the Vedas say that there are 8,400,000 total species of life. Out of those, 400,000 are human species of life. And so in the Vedas, we learn that this universe is kind of like a zoo of human forms. Now we're not talking about animals anymore. Now we're talking about two-armed, two-leg, more or less humanoid. And we have all the way from those who are quite primitive to those that have various powers. Demigod is a class of human form. So demigods look like us, but their bodies have powers and features that we can only dream of. They can go from one planet to another just by wanting to. And they live for a long period of time. And they don't need glasses, and they don't have to uh, worry about so many things because their bodies are free from many of the problems that our bodies have. So these are extremes. We go all the way from very primitive people to those demigods who have amazing powers and beautiful bodies and strong bodies. And in between, we have a whole zoo, and they are described in the Vedas. We have ghostly forms, we have various extraterrestrial forms, like um, the Kimpurushas, the Kinnaras, we have the Charanas, the Vidyadharas, we have various kinds of, demoniac forms, we have various kinds of um, forms that live in the subterranean heavenly planets. We have those who live in the ethers. We have those kind of human forms that are very small. We have those who are like yogis, and they're not demigods, but they have various material special powers, and they can use those powers. And so we have all these kind of uh, really amazing and diverse forms, all of them being humanoid, meaning that as a human form, you have free will and you have the ability to learn about spiritual life, or you have the ability to be totally not interested in spiritual life. That's up to you. The human has that prerogative. We can try to learn about spiritual life, or we can completely ignore spiritual life. That's what a human can do. And 400,000 species of humans all have that option. Once we go into the animal species, you don't have that option anymore. The animals can't choose, they can't learn about religion. They simply burn off their karma through their everyday sufferings that they go through to try to remain alive and to either find something to eat or to keep from being eaten. So this is the nature of animal life. There's no religion, and an animal's life is more or less completely um, pushed by the material nature. Whatever instinct or material nature dictates, the animal does that. And the animal can't comprehend anything higher. The human can. So demigods, Vidyadharas, Kimpurushas, um, so many other different kinds of human forms, these 400,000 types. They have that ability. And generally speaking, the demigod types, they tend to be more open and more interested in spiritual life, whereas the demoniac types, the daichas, tend to be less interested in spiritual life. So, in the earth plane here, we regular human beings, um, we're kind of, 50-50. Some of us are interested in spiritual life and others are not. And, as a statistical cumulative, it's hard to say, how many in some way or another have some inclination toward the supreme and how many have no inclination toward the supreme. So that's how I would describe these 400,000 human forms.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. We have two hands up. One is from Maharaj, and then there is one Bhakta here. I think I'll let him speak first, then I will allow Maharaj to ask later. Kwasin Tim Sapong. Please kindly unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hare Krishna. My name is Kwasin Tim Sapong. I'm in the United States. I have twofold questions, and one of them, I'm finding out for how long should a dead body be allowed to lay outside before postmortem or burial if I am to review my life whilst I was alive? Then the second question is, at what stage of pregnancy does a soul inhabits a fetus?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So as far as what the how long the body should remain, that I'm not very expert on. I don't know. Generally, in the Vedic system, the body is dealt with pretty soon. I think there's 5-10 days or something like that. By that point, the usually the body in India is burned. So the reason that in Vedic culture the body is burned is because the subtle body, oftentimes because of being sinful or committing suicide or being murdered, a person does not get another gross body right away. And for that reason, they remain a ghost. And that gross body, the ghost has been pushed out of it because of the uh, process we call death. Death separates the subtle body from the gross body. And if a person has become a ghost, then they can't, they don't know what to do with themselves. Um, just as in everyday life now, in the life that we know, we can see that people are confused. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know where they came from. They don't know what the nature is of the life that's right now happening to them. So, similarly, ghosts are the same way. It's not that when you die, suddenly everything gets revealed to you. That doesn't happen. That you have to work for by engaging in spiritual life. So most ghosts are just as bewildered and foolish as they were when they were alive, but now they're in a different situation. And the ghost tends to want to hover around the body that they once had. If the body is buried, then the ghost wants to be where the body was buried. And Okay, that's why there's so many ghosts in graveyards, you know. So the ghost wants to be where that rotting piece of, gross body was once the body that they inhabited, and they still identify with it. But if we burn the body, then there's nothing left for the ghost to become attached to. And generally, the ghost kind of moves on in the cycle of reincarnation to the next stage. Otherwise, they tend to become connected to the gross body as it gradually disintegrates over a long period of time. So that's one of the reasons. And, in the Vedic system, generally, the recommendation is to burn the body. And all over the world, this is starting to become more popular than it once was. Now, as far as when the soul enters the embryo, the soul is there from the very beginning. Otherwise, the embryo would never develop. We understand that matter is made of chemicals. We can talk of it from a Vedic point of view as earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Or we can talk about it from a more modern scientific view. The body is usually made of oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and we throw in some sulfur, phosphorus, and a few other of those kind of things. And those chemicals will not do anything. They simply just sit there. Now, if you pull together two chemicals that interact quite violently, then yes, they will create a new substance. If you pull together, for instance, sodium, which is a metal, and chlorine, which is a nonmetal, they will unite together to form salt. And this is kind of a violent reaction. So yes, that happens. But they don't create any complex shape or any kind of complex structure. Similarly, if you drop water or H2O into calcium carbide, a gas is produced, and that gas is called acetylene, and that can be ignited and it burns. So this is a simple reaction. And in our world, we see everywhere these kind of simple reactions. They do not create complex arrangements. For a complex arrangement, you have to have the presence of the soul or the subtle body. The soul is within the subtle body. And wherever there is a soul and a subtle body, then the chemicals arrange into what we usually call, in the modern day, organic chemicals, various polymers and peptides, various DNA, and various other kinds of, you know, uh, collagens and all these other things. These are very complex chemicals, and they come together in various, uh, very complex structures. If you study how the cell works with its various organelles, the mitochondria, the Golgi complex, the nucleus, the nucleolus, the um, various kinds of parts of the cell, the endoplasmic reticulum. These are very complicated chemical structures. And not only are they complicated, they're interacting with one another in very strange and complex ways. Why do they do that? They do that because of the presence of consciousness, which is, of course, the same thing as saying the soul, which is within usually the subtle body. So, because the soul is within the subtle body, it creates this situation where this carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, chlorine, and all these other what usually get classed as basic um, uh, elements, they combine in very unusual, complex shapes and structures, which form organic chemicals and organic structures. So, without the presence of the soul, the fetus would never develop. And sometimes we see this uh, stillborn or the act of sex doesn't produce a child. Even though the sperm is there and the ovum is there, there's no child produced. Or at some point in the early stages of the gestation of the embryo, the soul leaves for one reason or another, and therefore we get stillborn or miscarriage or something like that. So, unless the soul is there, there will be no generation or no um, development of the embryo. It will not occur. So, from the very beginning of the fertilization of the egg, from that very beginning, the soul is already there. Otherwise, the two gametes would never make a zygote. They would never actually develop into a living being.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. We have His Holiness Bhakti Damodara Swami's hand up. He wants to ask a question and maybe suggestion. So Maharaj, please kindly unmute and comment.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Maharaj, thank you very much for a beautiful class. I was wondering, when we say back to Godhead, back to Godhead, back to Godhead, how does it work? Because in the spiritual world, we have mothers, we have fathers. How do the soul get there? Do we go there through birth, or we just appear there? And then if we just appear there, how the women and the men forms are taking place in the spiritual world? That's my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, we have to understand that the soul is eternal. Back in Bhagavad Gita again, 2:10, na tveva ham jatu na sam na tvam neme janadhipaha na chaiva na bhavishyama sarvabhayam ataparam. The thing that Krishna tells Arjuna is never was there a time when I did not exist. Okay, most people get that God is eternal. Never was there a time when I did not exist. But he says to Arjuna, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So we have, also other verses in the Bhagavad Gita, that describe the fact that the soul has not come into being, the soul does not come into being, and the soul will not come into the being. the soul is eternal, which means the soul has existed both in the past, no matter how far back you want to go, it's eternal in the past, and it will continue to exist into the future. So there was no birth or death for the soul. That's kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around at the first if you are just new to the idea that in Christianity, particularly in the Catholic faith, there is the notion of the soul being created by God. So we also say the soul is created by God, but it was not created at a certain point in time. The soul has always existed. You and I have always existed. That's the message of Bhagavad Gita. So the question then is, if we've always existed, where have we always existed? And the answer is, there is a spiritual world, and that spiritual world is eternal. We come from there, and we will ultimately go back there. And since the spiritual world is eternal, there are no new people being created there, nor is anyone dying there. However, sometimes the living being misuses his independence, and the living being decides, you know, why is it that this Krishna, this God, has to be the center of everything? Why can't I be the center? Why does this God have to be the center of everything? Can't I be the center sometimes? Um, and so Krishna sets that up that, okay, you want to be the center? We can do that. There's a place for you. It's called the material world. Bum, 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 bum. So we can come to the material world. And in the material world, each one of us thinks we're the center of the whole universe. Of course, never really completely works out, but we think like that. So in the material world, we can think like that. So when we come to the material world, we can take birth after birth, and sometimes it's called our God project. Each one of us imagines that we are the center of the universe, and our project is just to get everybody else on board, that I know I'm the center of the universe, but you don't. So, get with the program. You you got to, wake up and realize that I'm the center, not you, So that's our God project. And of course, we try to do that life after life, and it never really works out. And one day we realize, all right, all right, all right. Krishna is always going to be the center. And, there's nothing bad about that. I might as well really myself get with the program and go back to the spiritual world. So when we go back to the spiritual world, we have just gone back to where we came from. We don't belong here. We never did. And even if we spend millions or billions of lifetimes here in the material world, from eternal spiritual time, it's like a second. Oh, when we go back to the spiritual world, we just go back to where we always were, what we were always doing. It's kind of like, even if we were here in this material world for millions of lifetimes, it's like, you are up in the morning early and you're doing something and you sit down for a minute to look at something on your computer screen and you realize you just nodded out and you woke up again. It's like that. So even though we might have been in this material world for millions and billions of lifetimes, when we go back to the spiritual world, it's like we never left. And that entire time in this material world is like a flash. But while we're here, it certainly doesn't feel like that. It's a whole different time continuum here. We can mope around and travel around in this material world as long as we want. But eventually, everyone will figure it out and go back to the spiritual world. One lifetime or another might as well be sooner rather than later. And in the spiritual world, yes, strangely enough, there are families, there are children, and there are adults, but they're eternally children and eternally adults. But there are no old and decrepit people in the spiritual world. That doesn't exist. There's no need for that. And you are in a particular family eternally, and you have a particular relationship with the Supreme Lord eternally. You just go back to that relationship. And there are some who are in a relationship with Krishna as a child. There are some who are in a relationship with Krishna as an young youth or a young boy, and some who are in relationship with Krishna as an older adult. So Krishna is there in all these different ways. And he's there even in different forms, like in his Ramachandra expansion or in his Chaitanya expansion. And in this way, one can have a relationship with the Supreme Lord in various different ways. And we have that relationship. Nothing can ever change it. But when we go back, we simply pick up where we left off. That's all. And so, in some ways, the spiritual world resembles this world, but actually, the proper way to think about it is that this world resembles the spiritual world. It's not the other way around. This is like the kind of bumper version of the spiritual world. This is the virtual reality. That is the real reality. And there are some ways in which the spiritual world does not resemble the material world, like the fact that no one is born there and no one dies there. People do leave for a brief moment or two when they make the mistake of coming to the material world. But the Bhagavad Gita says that generally no one makes that mistake twice. The burnt child shuns the fire. So once we have come here and tasted the interesting flavors of pain, frustration, hatred, violence, anger, and all the wonderful things that this material world has to offer, we usually don't make that mistake again. Okay, now I'm unmuted again. All right. So, any other questions?
Salika Prabhu, please unmute yourself. You are muted. Salika Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you very much for the elaborate explanation about back to God. It's very interesting. Marat, I don't know how much time is still left for us. I still have two questions. One question is in the chat room, and there's one answer up.
Oh, there's a chat room question. I didn't see that.
Okay, so I'll read the chat room question first.
Okay.
But Ezekiel Tate is asking, please, is it okay to help someone who is going through his negative karma from his previous mistakes? Thank you.
Is it okay? Well, certainly, we can
Is
always
it?
help. We can always help. That's the nature of a devotee. However, one thing we should know is what genuine help is. Mostly, people do not understand how to really help people. So, we have a concept in the Vedic tradition, which is para upakara, which is the highest welfare work. Um, you can certainly give somebody something to eat. You can give them clothes. You can help them have somewhere to live, et cetera, et cetera. These things are kind of good mundane charity. However, what really helps people is to give them an opportunity to understand spiritual life. Because if you set somebody on the path to spiritual life, you have benefited not only them right now, but you will have changed their entire life trajectory, and eventually they will leave the material world. Otherwise, if you feed a person, tomorrow they have to eat again. If you give clothing or medical or food or whatever it is to people, why did they need clothing? Why did they need medical attention? Why did they need someplace to stay? The answer is that they didn't have very good karma. Usually, what it means is that as a result of sinful acts, one has become poor or diseased or in some way in this material distress. If you just alleviate the material distress, but you don't give them knowledge, the good chance is that they will simply create another episode of distress because they're continually engaged in sinful acts. So if a person is engaged in sinful acts and is not at all interested in spiritual life, they will continually pull down upon themselves various problems, one after another. You know, these problems manifest as legal issues, they manifest as material disasters, they manifest as want, like, needing water or food. They manifest as some kind of social stigmas and problems. They manifest as emotional and psychological disturbances. They manifest as physical ailments of various kinds. This is how a person experiences their bad karma. This is the way it comes. It comes from these various types of effects that are quite common in the material world. So, if a person is continuing to engage in selfish and material and sinful acts, we can expect that they are going to continue to need aid of one kind or another. But if they start spiritual life then they, first of all, they're starting to wipe out that karma that was headed their way. They already had built up that karma and it was going to smack them at some point. So they're starting to destroy that. And better is they're not creating new karma for the future. And even better than both of those is they're gradually understanding what's really going on in this world and setting themselves up to go back to the spiritual world.
Okay, thank you, Maharaj. The next question is from Ben. Ben is asking, please, does the Holy Scriptures talk about the question is from Ben is, does the Holy Scriptures talk about the creation of different colors of humans? If yes, how did that happen?
Uh-huh. Do they talk about the different colors? Yes, actually. To some extent, they talk about that. And generally, this is the part where it's easy to get confused or misunderstand. Um, the word varna in itself means color, and it usually means color in the very way that makes us very uncomfortable, skin color. So, in the Vedas, it describes how various species are generated. It does that through the various daughters of Daksha and Kasyap Muni, where it wasn't through evolution, the Darwinian sense, that we have various kinds of creatures being generated, but rather these forms were created by various wives of Kasyap Muni, who were all sisters as well. They were daughters of Daksha. And they generated the various, animals and insects and so on and so forth. Even though they had human type bodies, these ladies, demigoddesses, gave birth to creatures that did not resemble them, like various cloven hooved animals, like birds, like aquatics, like insects, and even like various plants. Then, of course, after that, these various forms went on to replicate themselves the way that we generally see them now. And in a similar way, there were mind-born sons of Lord Brahma, and these mind-born sons then became progenitors of other kinds of population. And there is a story about generation from Vena. Vena was a king, and he was a very sinful king. He was very selfish. And as a result, Vena was killed by the Brahmanas. They uttered a mantra and Vena died. He disrespected them and he was causing suffering to the people under his care. So the Brahmanas decided that it was better to have no king than him. So when he died, then the citizens needed a new king. So, in a mystical way, then the Brahmanas churned the body of Vena. And from his thighs first came a dark complected being called Bahuka, if I remember the name correctly. And so this is one place where we hear about uh, the about dark skin. Now, um, generally, we hear that there are various kinds of classes of human beings, and some have better karma and some have worse karma. Those who generally live very primitive lifestyles are those who generally have worse karma. And those who study scripture and follow various austerities, such people have better karma. And from a Vedic perspective, there are certain races that are in a better situation than others. Now, we have to go to the next step, and that is Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga is a time where everything gradually gets mixed up. It's if you were a painter and you were using various colors, you might use just single colors like red or green. But as Kali Yuga progresses, everything gets mixed up. The colors get mixed up. And therefore, we have all these shades of more and more mixed up, kinds of characteristics. So the result is that as this mixture goes on, then we no longer are really clear who has what, you know. Uh, the Brahmanas were supposed to be lighter skin. The Kshatriyas were supposed to be a little darker in skin. And we get down to the Shudras, who are supposed to be dark skinned. Uh, However, in Kali Yuga, practically there are no people with good qualities. Everybody is a Shudra in Kali Yuga, whatever color their skin happens to be. And the nice thing is we just talked about today, we aren't our bodies, whether we're in a black body or a white body or whatever skin color we have, yellow or red or whatever other skin colors there are. Um, it doesn't matter. On a material level, it certainly does matter. Everybody knows that well, that what your skin color makes a big difference in what is available to you on a material level. And so if you want material happiness, you want material advancement, yes, you're going to have to struggle like anything. But if that's not your goal, if your goal is spiritual life, that makes no difference from a spiritual perspective. So in the Vedic scriptures, we have stories about people who were supposed to be of a bad background, but actually they became great devotees and great spiritual leaders. On the other side of the coin, we have people who were supposed to be from a very good background, and they became either atheists or they became oppressors of various kinds. So um, you can't always judge a book by its cover. And although the Vedas do describe characteristics of various people, and they describe oftentimes what are dysfunctional characteristics of various kinds of people. They do describe that. At the same time, we are not prisoners of our body. We never were and never will be. If we have one kind of body now, in the future, we'll have some other kind of body. If we have a male body now, usually the tendency is that the next life will have a female body. And again, if we have a female body now, the good chance that we'll have a male body in the next life. We have one color of body now, there's a good chance in the next lifetime we'll have a different color of body. It all depends on so many things because we're not our color and we're not our gender either. These things are external to the soul. So the real process is to engage in spiritual culture. And if a person purifies themselves internally, that's what really counts. There will be social factors. That's unavoidable. That's the way the world is set up. We can certainly work to make those social factors better, and we should do that. But to some extent, that's always going to be there because people, many of them are materially motivated. They only see things from a material perspective. And for them, where you place on the ladder of material perspective is everything. And it's actually, in many cases, a blessing to have bad karma because we're less attached to the material world. Those who have good karma are generally more attached to the material world because they imagine that they're enjoying. Actually, in many ways, they're suffering just like anybody else. Um, it's surprising that, although there's this huge hierarchy of what's available to you at various stages of karma, you know, in the higher stages of good karma, you've got so many things available to you. And the lower stages of bad karma, you have so little available to you. But spiritual life is available to everyone without restriction. You don't have to have any prerequisites. You just have to have the desire. And if you're actually after material benefit, if you're actually after material progress, then you will recognize that the limitations of your karma are going to frustrate you again and again and again. Um, and what's probably not so obvious is those who have good karma, they are also frustrated. The material world doesn't care. It's going to frustrate everybody. That's the nature of the material world. Nobody wins this game. So people with so-called good karma, they suffer in one way. And people with so-called bad karma, they suffer, but it's just in a different way. And that's all. If you want to stop suffering, you've got to come to spiritual life. And even then you will suffer, but you will voluntarily suffer in a way that will remove all your suffering in the long run. So that's, some of the things that I could say about that. And I think it's important to think about these things and to try to talk about them. And it is really easy to misunderstand these kind of things. So we are not prisoners of our body because we are not the body. That's the basic bottom line of the Bhagavad Gita and of all Vedic teachings. We got a body because we left the spiritual world. And so depending on our karma, we've got one flavor of body or another. It may not even be a human body. But at any rate, we are not the body. And when we act on the spiritual level, our bodies are no longer the reason for our sin, the reason for our fall down, the reason for our limitations. We overcome our material limitations by engaging in spiritual life. Okay.
Fantastic.
Oh,
Thank you so much, Maharaj. We have one more question.
yeah.
I think it's spent so much time, please, Maharaj. We have Gifty Agbeno still waiting to ask a question, please. Maharaj. Gifty, you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Okay, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Please, thank you so much for the opportunity given me this morning. My question is that why is it that when one is in the world, he have things, things become very okay. He doesn't believe in anything. He live all right. But the moment you want to live an upright life, that you want to be on God's side or you want to do the will of God, things become very difficult sometimes to extend that you said you regret being, let me use Christian as because I'm a Christian, that you regret being a Christian than to be in the world, do what the worldly do. Why is it so, please? Thank you.
Yes, this is a $60 million question that the material world doesn't cut anybody a break. You know, sometimes we see that people who are very sinful, such people find themselves in good situations. And sometimes we see people who are very spiritually inclined. We see them in very desperate situations. There's a funny story in the Mahabharata where, you know, Yudhisthira has lost the gambling match and they've been exiled to the forest for 13 years. And now that they're in the forest, he's talking with his wife, Draupadi, and Draupadi says, "My dear husband, Yudhisthira, you are blatant proof that karma doesn't work. You always do what is the most difficult, the spiritually correct thing in any circumstance. You are more observant of Dharma than anybody has ever known or seen. Yet here you are. We are living on the ground. We are eating off plates that are leaves, and we sleep on the dirt, you know. And Duryodhan, who is sinful, is there in Hastinapur in the palace, having servants bring him his meal on a golden plate. And Yudhisthira turns to his wife and says, "My dear Draupadi, what you are saying is that atheists say." But nevertheless, this is a question that comes into our minds, you know, why is it like this sometimes? And the answer is that because of past good deeds, sometimes people who are sinful now are still enjoying the good benefit of the good things they did in the past. And when that sort of bank account runs out to zero, then suddenly their entire life turns around. And it did for Duryodhana. You know? He was living the life of an emperor, and then after the battle of Kurukshetra, it was all finished, you know. So there is that moment where you can't go on doing the wrong thing forever. At some point, you know, birds come home to roost. At some point, the devil has his due. At some point, your good karma bottoms out and you get the result of all the sinful and selfish things that you did. Now, from the other perspective, for people like Eudister, for people who are doing the right thing, and it seems that for them their life is full of various difficulties, this is natural. Tapo divyam putrakayena sattvam, that we have to engage in tapo divyam, which is austerities. So what's the difference? We are choosing our austerities, and we are choosing to undergo difficulties which purify us, and they help others. So when a person chooses to learn about spiritual life, and they choose to help others by teaching them what they themselves are learning about spiritual life, this is tapo divyam. This is uh, austerity. This austerity is necessary to, first of all, purify ourselves, and then to be able to be empowered to help others. This is tapo divyam. And we discover that through our difficulty, we are we are burning off some of the bad karma. Krishna doesn't write off all of our bad karma, but he allows us to work our way out of some of the stuff that we've done in the past. So we're burning through a little bit of it that way. And sometimes through our efforts to help others, we are getting a taste of their karma that didn't belong to us. It belonged to somebody else, but we are voluntarily accepting it, the suffering, for their benefit. And this is very much appreciated by the Supreme Lord. And so we're getting the karma from others. And this is a part of our tapo divyam, our accepting the karma. It is said that the spiritual master has to accept the karma of his or her disciples. So the spiritual master, to some extent, suffers on behalf of those he is trying to help. This is obvious in the life of Jesus Christ, and it's obvious in many other kinds of situations, that when you undertake the task of helping others, expect that you are going to get smacked, as the common humorous phrase goes, no good deed ever goes unpunished. So we are getting part of this karma. We are burning off our own karma, and we are helping others to get rid of their bad karma. And so in this way, devotees are happy that sometimes things are not so good. Um, and sometimes, we are in difficult situations, but we know that the Supreme Lord is looking out for us. And eventually we'll be in the spiritual world where there is no misery at all. There is no misery in the spiritual world. So, tat te nukampam shushamik shamanam bunjana evatma kritam vipakam vadbir vapurbir vidadan namaste jive to yo mukti pade sadhaya bhak, I believe is how that verse goes. That the someone who patiently tolerates the difficulties due to their past ill behavior, all the while glorifying the Supreme Lord with body, mind, and words, such a person is a suitable candidate for liberation because it is his rightful claim. Tate nu kampam shushamik shamanam bunjana evatma kritam vipamir tad vid vipar. What is it? Tate nu kampam shushamik shamanam bunjana evatma kritam vipak vid. Hridvag vapur bir vididan namaste jive te yo mukti pade siddhaya bhak. So this is a verse I think about often, you know. Usually the best way to think about it is I'm just getting a small portion of what actually should have headed my direction. So Krishna has reduced what would normally have been coming my way. And in this way, I'm happy to go on with spiritual life. I'm happy to try to help others, even though in the process of helping others, I will also, to some extent, have to bear the suffering that they were due. And in this way, I will help them as well. So that's how I would reply to that. And I think we're starting to get up onto 2 hours now.
Yeah,
So,
thank you so much, Maharaj.
I appreciate all of your interest and your good questions. I'm very enlivened when there are questions, you know, in a group after I speak. Sometimes either people are snoozing or I've completely bewildered them so badly that they can't even think of questions to ask. So, at any rate.
Thank you so much, Maharaj.
Yes.
It's been 2 hours. I think we'll have to allow you to go now. The question keeps coming.
Okay.
But we have to put the time to hit.
Okay.
One back there was still asking a question.
Big, good group here, you know.
Yeah.
People from various,
Mostly
mostly Nigeria and from Ghana.
And yes, Maharaj, they are mostly from Ghana, and they are followers of Chandrashekra Prabhu.
I see.
Yes.
All right. So thank you all very much for your kind attention. And all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare.
Hare Krishna. So we ask all devotees to unmute themselves to chant one powerful Hare Krishna mantra to appreciate Maharaj for this wonderful class.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Ram, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much for bringing the devotees for the class. So tomorrow will be the same. Tomorrow there's going to be B.Gita also. So from now we are going to be having B.Gita. So please bring on devotees.
Haribo, 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 Haribo,
Haribo, Haribo, Haribo, Haribo. Haribo, 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 Haribo.
Yeah, Prabhu, I think you can end the meeting. There's some background noise from other places that are very nice.
Yeah. Salika Babu.
Yes.
Some people are working, so their background is
Salika
very
Babu,
noisy.
please, can you end all? Salika Babu, please end
Okay,
all.
yes, we'll do that.